The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this March 15th, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can listen to my show every evening, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. It's also played at 11 a.m. And if you can't listen to either of those, go to my website at arcticbeacon.com. And you can listen to shows that go back almost 10 years on a number of different stations and put it all together and see what you come up with. And as the years go on, I remember back years ago when I first learned about the Vatican-led New World Order and tying together the Holy See, the Papacy, the Knights of Malta, and our governments of the world. I thought it basically might be some rogue people working together with these governments. But as I researched it, I found out that it was an institutional cancer. The institution of the Vatican has been cancerous ever since its inception. Those clinging to hopes that it will change, let me tell you, history tells us otherwise. For those of you clinging to your political system and your country's position of democracy, freedom, and all the other things that you learned about in high school, in college, that will change. And you can thank the Vatican, the Jesuit order, and your politicians for turning your country into nothing more than a fascist state, just as they've done everywhere they've gone. And in the wake of this, you see the most horrendous crimes, the most unbelievable things going on as far as genocide, as far as murder, child abuse, pedophilia, and all of these things that we talk about. However, it never seems to get any better, does it? And let's talk today first. Now, if you go back to my show yesterday, I played a very good presentation of a man who put together quotes of people going back hundreds of years who tried to warn us of the very thing we talk about here. And one of the things they mentioned was that there is no crime too horrific, no government official, no person in this world that is going to be left aside if they don't get in line with this kind of new world order. That is really an old world order that they have been trying to implement since the beginning of the time. Their goal is control of the entire world and to keep the papacy in power. Now, whatever the ends justify the means. And the Jesuit order has been the military arm of the Vatican ever since its inception in the 1500s with their first Jesuit general as Ignatius Loyola, organizing this group to basically kill Protestant reformers. And they did a good job of it if you study history. The Inquisition hasn't changed, folks. The tactics have changed, but the office right now is in your own country. The head of the Inquisition right now, it's called the Office of the Doctrine of the Faith. They've changed the name to sugarcoat it, but their goal is the same thing: the destruction of anyone in this country who does not get in line with the New World Order. And you're going to see a change. You see it right now. Now, I talk a little bit. So what I wanted to mention first, go to those quotes yesterday, and you'll see people from all over the world a number of people from America, trying to warn us about what's happening today, trying to warn us about the loss of our freedoms and how the Vatican and the elites working with them in our government, who pledge their allegiance to the Pope, not to us or the Constitution, how they have a master plan to turn this country into basically a Catholic country. Now, whether Catholicism changes, whether they destroy their own church and create a new one in Jerusalem and create this idea of a Messiah, and they come back to save everyone after this chaos. If you look at the quotes yesterday, you'll see that one of the ideas of the Jesuit order has always been create chaos in countries, overthrowing governments that aren't friendly to them, to basically change the laws, to change the atmosphere, and they do it through chaos. And that whole idea of from order comes chaos. The order that they want is theirs. Now, if you look at history, we've spent show after show talking about many of the revolutions during a very concentrated period of time during the American Revolution. There were others going on, the French. In this time period, there was the Russian. There were many of these things. And every one of them, you can find the Jesuits involved, instigating this kind of rebellion. And so we've done shows about how the American Revolution was a Jesuit idea, how it was carried out. It wasn't us just fighting England. There was a master plan to take over this new world, to turn it into a place where freedom existed so that the Vatican, known persecutors at the time in Europe, could get their foot in the door here and then expand their power. And that's exactly what they have done. So, moving forward to 2016 and the presidential debates, like I said, I keep an eye on them only for a reason, and that is to kind of see how they're operating. What lies are they telling us today? How do they mask the truth? Who are the candidates? Where do they come from? And lately, I'm seeing something amazing, because you have candidates from all spectrums here. You have the establishment, Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side, who is basically a follower of Carol Quigley and a Jesuit. She's Jesuit trained, and her mentors all come from the same school. Then you have Bernie Sanders, who's a declared socialist, whose offices are in the Masonic Lodge in Burlington, Vermont. Now, Bernie wants to expand government. Hillary Clinton, of course, will expand government. Then on the Republican side, we have what's going on shows me clearly that Donald Trump and the guys they have now, there's 4 left, running for office, completely turn the spectrum. Of course, they talk in terms of limiting government power. Then you have this guy Trump, who is basically there to create chaos. There was an article done by a conservative magazine years ago, and they said, how much money he has. He can buy what he wants. He used to keep not videotapes, but he had actual speeches translated by Hitler by his bedside, and he used to read them. Now, whether he's been a Jesuit plot for a long time, or whether he was selected just in the recent years to create this chaos, he's doing a good job, and you're seeing it before our eyes. What's happening is that he's pitting one part of America against another, and at all of his rallies, you're seeing this chaos beginning to erupt. And it is a definite strategy of tension here to make this country look like a third world country. When they play these things overseas, they see America crumbling again, and this is the Jesuit idea, to create this chaos. Now, you know as well as I do, whoever they pick, nothing will change. And they can work the left just like they work the right. It's the Hegelian dialectic. And I keep telling people, if you hinge your hopes on one of these men, you're failing to see the obvious. And the obvious is, after you study this for years, who is behind the scenes working these people, controlling our government, actually selecting the president, and our vote means absolutely nothing. What a world it would be if just we didn't fall prey to this kind of strategy. And you see these people punching each other over ideas at these conventions. And you see Donald Trump. There's two stories here. You got one, the leftist groups now being organized by you know who, infiltrating these right-wing Trump rallies, and you're hearing the screams of First Amendment rights are being taken away. The right doesn't have its First Amendment rights. Trump doesn't have his First Amendment rights. And then on the left, you're hearing this, that we cannot tolerate a man who speaks in these terms. And if you listen to Donald Trump speaking, there's been many analogies to Hitler been made by comedians and made by others on TV. And many will laugh about it. But you see this same kind of dictatorial attitude. He gives speeches that have no sense whatsoever, and he also encourages this violence by stating there was a guy that sucker punched a black man at one of his rallies, and Trump had the audacity to say, you know something, he was at his wit's end, and the guy that was hit did not act in violence towards the man. The guy just sucker punched him, and Trump said, well, maybe he's probably at his wit's end. And the guy was taken to jail and was charged with assault and released, and said, well, maybe the next time we'll kill that guy. And you know what Trump says? I think I will pay your legal fees. So he's actually helping this, creating this chaos, when in fact, behind the scenes, he's already been selected. Just as the Jesuits selected, if you listen to history, if you study history, Pope Pius XII selected Hitler. The American contingent of Edward, when the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia was going on, guess who he sent over as an ambassador? Father Edmund Walsh, who created the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University, and he went there on this mission supposedly to bring food to the starving, when in fact he was there to place Stalin in power with Western money, and that's what he did. So this kind of strategy of tension, controlling both sides of everything, whether it be politics, war, the drug cartels, is never mentioned. And so I ask you this question. You'll listen, you'll turn on any channel now, any news channel, and you're going to hear this. Nobody has, the right is taking away the left's idea of freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is being taken away by the right, to the left. But in a sense, the real freedom of speech and religion being taken away is by ideas that I'm talking about right now, silently taking it away. Now, I present stories that show you, without a doubt, beyond a reasonable doubt, that this kind of speech that I'm doing on this show is not allowed on public broadcasting companies that speak to millions of people. And they will not allow you to answer these, to present this kind of information, because they are there to control freedom of speech, to create an illusion of the freedom of speech. Now, I presented many stories of how this operates in the mainstream media and how it operates on the internet. Now, you're going to think you're going to get freedom of speech from guys like Alex Jones, a.k.a. Bill Hicks, David Icke, a number of these people who are basically controlled opposition. And they decided a long time ago that we had to place people in power in the internet, give them the biggest audience, give them money, let them expand so that they can control exactly what's going on as well. Now, you got to figure that out for yourself. And that's why I say listen to these people. Listen to Bill Hicks. and listen to all of them. But you have to understand that you can get a lot from them. They're going to tell you some things, but they're going to lead you down the wrong rabbit hole. Now, what is the right rabbit hole? I think the right rabbit hole is understanding all of this stuff, talking openly about it, being able to get this into a major question on a broadcast like CNN. Now, can that happen? Well, how about even a major question on an internet station? Let me go back 10 years when I worked on the Genesis station, as well as the Republic Broadcasting Network, two, I believe, controlled opposition networks. I didn't know it at the time. You got to learn by your mistakes, right? But it didn't take me long to figure it out when I worked on there in Austin. Now, I remember at the time, there was a guy named Ron Paul advocating all of these ideas. Oh, the freedom fighter, we hate Washington, this whole idea. Now, he, at that time, was even going on internet shows, like Bill Hicks, Alex Jones, and like certain others who must have been in the pocket of the Vatican. Now, I remember I had outlined some, at this particular juncture, I had started to weave in much more about the Vatican into my shows, and it was causing some controversy there. I was the only one at the time doing it on these two controlled stations. And so, through the grapevine, I heard that my show was one of the most popular because people hadn't heard this view, the way I was presenting it. And guess what happened? At that time, I said to myself, well, if Ron Paul is a true patriot, he'll come on my show and I'll ask him some hard questions about the Vatican-led New World Order. Guess what? He was notified never to come on my show. And that told me right off the bat that I was on the right track. And I believe there's 100 more Ron Pauls out there right now in our political system who are covering this story. And let me give you an example. When you go to these debates, you're going to hear the major problems dealt with from the left and the right our country is supposedly facing. The one I like to start out with is the proverbial, in quotes, war on drugs. Now, you hear these answers, and you realize they have no idea. Well, let me rephrase this. They either know how far they can go and understand where it comes and how it operates, or they're just so ignorant they've been, given this information and they act as robots and tell you how they're going to stop the war on drugs with, one, building a wall on Mexico. That's going to create we're going to stop drugs from coming in as well as illegal immigration. Oh, we're going to get tough on the drug cartels. Oh, really? But do they ever tell you that how it really operates? And so let's use the next few minutes to show you what should be asked on these shows. Now, in the end, you're going to hear this Operation Gladio, which had its inception in Rome with Pope Pius XII, right after World War II. A guy by the name of Wild Bill Donovan, head of our OSS, which was the precursor of it was the CIA. The OSS morphed into the CIA. Many call it the Catholic Intelligence Organization. And they, at the time, were in the, as the Vatican and they had created communism, created Stalin, created this whole, after World War II, we needed another enemy, right? Hitler was supposedly killed, which he wasn't. And that was over. So the destruction of Europe, Germany was there. Now they had to rebuild it and so on and so forth. But we needed another enemy. And they already had this planned out and they had communism. But now, to fight now, money has to be made here. So to fight communism, they needed money first. Because their idea was to create rebel armies all over the world. You'll see them in Nicaragua. You'll see them all over. Vietnam, etc., to fight the supposed rush of communism that's going to take over America. This was a strategy of tension back then. Well, Pope Pius XII and Bill Donovan and others had no idea how to raise this money. So one of them looked at Chiang Kai-shek fighting off Mao Zedong in China, and how he did it was he basically decided to work together with the drug cartels in the opium trade and to basically sell to the public, tell to the Chinese people, drugs. They would use that money to then fund their war against Mao Zedong. And a bell rang in the head of the Jesuits and everybody working on this. How are we going to continue this strategy of tension? You know, do you think these rebel armies just crop up out of nowhere and they get all these arms and all this money to operate? Of course not. Now, this is never dealt with when we talk about immigration in our political system right now. So you know you're being fed a lie. You're being covered up by both the media and the presidential, the people running for office. So what happens? They decide, well, maybe we can do the same thing. So they figure out, and if you go back to history, their first big, huge area to grow opium, poppies, was in Burma. Now, Burma was a perfect place for it. And so, boy, this idea was starting to work. Now all they had to do was use their Jesuit help, the priests and all of these, or these spies in all of these countries, to gather these groups once they had the money after the drugs started rolling in. And their idea was simply this: we, the government, will work together with the drug cartels, bring drugs to America, sell them to the people, create this idea that we have many, many criminals getting into our country with drugs, selling to people who are vulnerable, and we will make a profit off of this, and that we will use to fund our wars. And so it was working. And you'll see, if you look in the early 50s, there was a very low percentage of people using drugs in America. In the 60s, it began to skyrocket, and their business and their whole idea was working well. So together with the military, bringing in drugs, allowing the big drug dealers in, they were selling drugs and making money hand over fist. But what are you going to do with all this money? Billions of dollars, millions of dollars every hour being made. Well, they had to figure out a place, what bank would take this? How are we going to distribute this? Well, banks they wanted to stay away from any kind of federal oversight. So they decided that the safest place was the Vatican Bank. And so billions of dollars would go through the Vatican Bank, which has no oversight outside of the Pope and a few of his merry men. And then it would be put through the laundromat, washed clean, and distributed out to every bank. Now the banks can take it. It's coming from the Holy See. It's coming from God's world. It's clean. But in fact, it's the dirtiest money laundering operation that was ever conceived. And it created havoc in the world. It created not only many, many drug deaths in America, people being caught up in that fake, they created the hippie movement, when you really want to think about it. That was an idea that was spawned by the Jesuits, and you can go and find out Pierre de Chardin, the Jesuit priest who had this idea of, creating this kind of system of this chaos out of social, you remember I remember, well, many of you probably, I grew up in that period, so I know exactly what they did to us in our minds. I mean, the kids, they didn't. How did we know this back then? So, we're about out of time. I'm going to finish this up, and we're going to talk about why we're in Afghanistan, then move to the 9 horrific crimes of the Vatican that you probably maybe don't know about. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal on this March 15th, 2016 day in our calendar. And before we get into the aspect of money laundering and where all this money finally went to creating these wars through drugs, let me get back to a missing point. 2 points I failed to bring up. Not only does our government work with the cartels and they use the Vatican Bank when they started this whole operation in Burma, where they protected the growing fields, the Vatican was supposedly getting about 15% of everything going through there for their services. Now, secondly, they needed drug dealers here, so the CIA had recruited, or even the Catholic Church or Jesuit order, you don't know who they are sometimes, recruited guys here selling drugs, big dealers that were making millions. And a couple of them appeared on shows 15 years ago talking about how they were recruited by the CIA and they were given a free hand to sell drugs. They were the big guys. And every now and then you'd hear of a small drug bust, so you think the government's trying at least. Well, they don't tell you they're involved in it. And you can go and check the involvement between our government, the cartels, the growing fields in Burma back then, and the Vatican. Operation Gladio, conceived by Pope Pius XII and a gentleman by the name of William Donovan and a couple others who were the head of the OSS, morphed into the Catholic Intelligence Organization, CIA. Fast forward, there was a huge drought in Burma. So they were losing money. Reported when this drought occurred, maybe about 80% of their drug money was being lost. So they had to find another place, and they found a perfect growing area in Afghanistan to this day, creating those fields in Afghanistan that needed to be protected. And so that's why we're really there. And some of our military who tried to tell us that, one, if you remember, a football player that was supposedly killed by friendly fire, that was going to be his message, played for I think it was the St. Louis or the Arizona Cardinals. And he went there thinking he was fighting terrorism when in fact he was protecting the poppy fields. So they moved their money-making operation, still using the Vatican Bank and now a couple others in the Caymans and other places where they can money launder this stuff, to still create these rebel organizations that were fighting supposed communism, correct? Well, communism had long since passed. And during the time of Afghanistan, they now had needed another enemy. And so what was the other enemy? That's the war on terror. Has now replaced communism. But the way they're making money to create these rebel groups, such as Al-Qaeda, all these other Boko Haram, all these other terrorist groups now fight Islam fighting Christians. A huge conflict now they have. Guess what? They're funding it in the same exact one of the ways. They're funding it in the same exact way. But now, is it amazing how ISIS grew to be the largest terror organization? Do you think they had help? Our help? Of course. And so this is never discussed. So the problem isn't just manning a big, huge army like they're telling us now in the presidential debates to fight ISIS, carpet bomb them, the whole. No. The problem is to stop the problem at the root. But since all of these people work with the root problem, it'll never be solved. And since the Vatican is right there in cahoots with them, this is what needs to be done. Now, I'm not saying throw the Jesuits out of America. No, I'm just saying let's uncover, let's expose what they do. Now, they would have been exposed a long time ago. And this wouldn't have been as easy to talk, that no one's wouldn't people want to hear the real truth behind the war, what this drug problem is and how they create these terrorism groups? Of course they do. But they knew they had to control the media. And so by controlling the media, you're getting basically led around the nose and not learning the truth. Now you probably wonder, where do I come in? Well, I happened to live in Rome for 7 years as a journalist, going there not knowing anything, and learning this stuff firsthand. And so that's probably the reason I talk about it, because I was lucky enough to be there. Now, some people say it's luck, or some people say it's a curse, because I'll tell you what, it changed my life. And I probably would have been up there like Anderson Cooper talking about the same thing, because I wouldn't have understood it either. It's not easy, especially when you live here and you don't get the truth. And I saw that. You get much more there. So I learned it and then began to research it and see how it really operates here and around the world. Now, one thing I missed is so they're making money off of, there's a big, huge heroin problem now in America. Well, did you realize that when you take opium and from those fields and you turn it into heroin, you need an enormous amount of chemicals to do that? Guess where those chemicals to make heroin come from? Our big pharmaceutical companies. So they're profiting from this. This is never mentioned. Never mentioned at all. Now I wonder where all those chemicals are coming to produce the heroin. And who's profiting from that? Let alone all of their vaccines and all the other stuff they do. Well, I think that's just a point. Now you can probably go to many other things of our major problems in our country, financial and whatever, and they're all glossed over. One major one is nobody ever talks about the Federal Reserve being not federal, being the downfall of America. None of these candidates do, and that should tell you they're in the pocket of the Vatican. Now, why don't we listen to this? This is about an 8-minute clip on the 9 most shocking crimes of the Vatican. Now, some of them, the beginning ones, I had an opportunity to be in Rome to watch and to see. And so let's listen to this short presentation.
Mafia ties. Pronouncing Catholicism is a staple of Cosa Nostra not only because it looks above board, but because Catholicism itself has never historically denounced mobsterism. Strange? It makes a bit more sense given the Vatican's long-shrouded history with Italy's most powerful organized crime groups, the Calabrian Brunetta, Campanian Camera and Sicilian Cosa Nostra included. The partnerships ostensibly involve white-collar crimes, allow laundering drug money through the Vatican's highly secretive financial management. But many even allege the mysterious death of Pope John Paul I in 1978, 33 days after his pontification and suggesting foul play, was on account of the Pope's plans to weaken the Vatican's relationship with Italy's largest private bank. There was no autopsy. Evidence uncovered by the Bank of Italy screamingly suggested Vatican ties to organized crime at the time, and 4 years later, well, they were confirmed. Money laundering. As it turns out, the death of Pope John Paul I coincides, notably, with the most infamous unveiling of a Vatican mob partnership. In 1978, the Bank of Italy discovered several billion lira in illegally exported funds by Italy's former largest private bank, Banco Ambrosiano. A subsequent slew of investigations and convictions slapped the bank's general manager, Robert Calvi, with hefty fines and some prison time. How does all this implicate the Catholic Church? Calvi's nickname was God's Banker. The Vatican Bank was Banco Ambrosiano's largest shareholder. By 1982, Calvi foresaw the financial catastrophe at the heart of his shady financial networks and fled Italy. In June of that year, the Banco Ambrosiano fell short of accounting for $1.5 billion US dollars, about $3.15 billion adjusted, and collapsed. A great portion of that siphoned money, the investigation determined, had been siphoned through the Vatican Bank itself. The same month, police found Calvi dead, hanging from London's Blackfriars Bridge, pockets full of bricks. More money laundering. The sequel to that last story doesn't quite have the same wild mystery intrigue, but in 2012, anti-mafia prosecutors in Italy came across some hefty €1 million transactions made by a parish of one Father Ninni Trappiidi. He was quickly sacked by the Vatican, in time for the Holy See to deny what prosecutors suspected, money laundering for a mafia godfather. It didn't help that Father Ninni's former parish was the richest in Sicily and the mafia's stronghold. This all emerged 2 weeks after the Vatican Bank's head was ousted, as the target of a separate money laundering investigation. Gay prostitution rings. In 2010, Italian newspaper La Repubblica reported 2 Vatican employees as accessories to a gay male prostitution ring. One was a papal gentleman and senior advisor, responsible for managing Catholic missionary activities worldwide. He acted as pimp by soliciting male prostitutes through a younger member of the Vatican choir. Naturally, the Vatican severed all ties with the two. Italian police believe they represented a much broader organized male prostitution network operating in Rome. Smuggling Nazis. It's known that plenty of high-ranking bishops were openly pro-Nazi, but the Vatican adamantly refuses to comment on the full extent of its operations providing Nazi war criminals with false identities to get them overseas in the aftermath of WEI. Overwhelmed with millions of legitimate refugees, the Red Cross relied greatly on Vatican references. Nazi officers like Joseph Mengele and Klaus Barbie could very well have obtained their travel papers through the church. Protecting pedophiles. Possibly the biggest and darkest mark on the Roman Catholic institution in modern history is its seemingly endless list of sex abuse scandals. Pedophilia appears so rampant in the Holy See that new cases barely make front-page news. Instead, how the Vatican handles this obviously long-term problem has become the new emphasis. Historically, it hasn't handled it so well. While thousands of offending parishioners, many in America, have been acquitted, underpunished, or simply relocated by the Vatican, the cover-ups represent another degree of scandal. Bishops have been known to secretly settle child sexual abuse claims with victims to insulate the church, and a recently discovered internal document from 1962, approved by Pope John XXIII, details a policy of strictest secrecy when sexual abuse comes to light. Does the Catholic Church maintain a no-tattletale policy within its ranks? The evidence suggests so. Even more money laundering. The Vatican's rich history of siphoning illegal cash has all but reached a spilling point this year. In January, Italian financial police arrested yet another clergyman for his laundering multiple millions from offshore companies through his Vatican bank account. Monsignor Nunzio Scarano, former accountant in the Vatican's main financial office, forfeited over 6.5 million euros in property and assets to police seizure, including a luxurious apartment filled with expensive art and antique valuables. Facing a serious PR issue, Pope Francis now purports his intent to hollow out the old rotten financial networks underlying the Vatican's finances. Since coming to power, he's fired multiple cardinals, Vatican bank officials and financial information directors, and he has become the first pope to excommunicate the mafia. In short, many fear for his life. Baby stealing. In 2011, evidence came to light that the Catholic Church in Spain ran a baby trafficking program for decades, beginning during the reign of Spanish dictator Francisco Franco and lasting until the 1990s. A network of doctors, nurses, priests and nuns sold upwards of 300,000 babies for adoption, just short of snatching them from their mothers' arms. Hospitals convinced the mothers, usually those deemed unsuitable, such as the young and unmarried, that their newborns died after birth. The hospitals then sold the newborns for a pretty penny to well-off devout Catholic families, and falsified their birth certificates with the adoptive surname. Tens of thousands of Spanish adults today don't know their birth parents and, fearing the legal culpability of their adoptive guardians, won't try to find out. A similar and morbid operation occurred in the Magdalene laundries, most notably in Ireland, until as recently as the 1990s. Unmarried women who fell pregnant were sent to work in these laundries, and their babies were often forcibly taken from them after the women were coerced into signing renunciation papers. The babies were sold, typically to wealthy American families. Vatilux. The 2012 Vatilux scandal probably represents the single worst blow to the Vatican's credibility in recent times, not least because it exposed heavy factionalism within the Catholic administration. For one, the leak itself, by Pope Benedict's personal butler, suggested a political agenda, and with Benedict's subsequent resignation, it proved successful. But then there's the information itself, letters exposing abuses of power, improper financial management, and even blackmailing of homosexual clergy. The revelations, portraying the inner workings of the Apostolic Palace with a voyeuristic sense of TV-style drama, irrevocably tainted public perception of the Catholic Church.
Okay, that was just a few things that the Vatican's been involved with. And most of them we're talking about in Europe. So I'm going to ask you Americans, do you think that just goes on there? In your country, they come here and they're all of a sudden as clean and white as the driven snow. No, they do the same thing here and more horrendously. I'll tell you, they've done it for centuries. And until you understand that, you're never going to have any kind of freedom in this country. You don't have freedom of religion anymore, and let me explain why. I use the Tony Alamo Ministry as an example. They're one of the few churches that tried to tell you these things for 40 years, and you see what happened to them. They not only have had their children taken away when there were no child abuse charges ever proven, they've had their pastor jailed for 175 years on bogus charges that I've shown to you that the court where he was convicted in 2009, I believe, it was the biggest kangaroo court I've ever seen. And then thirdly, they're now busy taking away their property. That's how the Vatican operates. But the things that they do are never, ever talked about. And so the idea becomes this. When you looked at how they control our governments, and we talked about that, now you got to look at what they're doing to the Protestant churches. We've seen through the years how they infiltrate that, how they whitewash the Bible, how they are now advocating this unity amongst them. But they do say, we are the boss, we are the top church. And so this unity in error is probably how one of the biggest crimes against freedom of speech and freedom of religion in this country. But it never is talked about by our candidates, is it? Because they're controlled by them as well. And when you think about the crimes they've committed, all of these things, let's listen to a 2-minute clip here and ask yourself why this wasn't talked about. Sacrifices of children in the Catholic Church.
Are at the scene of what appears to be the ritualistic murder of Sister Margaret Ann Paul. Found in the sacristy of Mercy Hospital, the nun has been stabbed 31 times. Investigators see no reasonable motive. The nun's ungodly murder slips into the cold case files. But in June of 2003, the old cold case is revived when the Attorney General's office receives a letter from a woman with startling allegations against members of the Toledo, Ohio clergy.
The letter contained a lot of examples of sadomasochistic sex, priests paying to have sex with young girls in the parish, ritualistic things, girls being on the altar, being offered up, animals being sacrificed. The letter even had examples of children being killed.
There had been people in robes that surrounded her at a very young age in a basement with candles, being penetrated by snakes and having insects put on her body.
The woman alleges abuse from multiple members of the clergy over the course of 7 years, beginning in 1968. One of the priests she claims sexually assaulted her is Gerald Robinson. Sentenced to 15 years to life, he maintains his innocence to this day.
The damage that Roman papacy has done, and I hope it explodes. They are some uncircumcised dogs. I hope that they are castrated so that they do not have any more children, so that they do not produce that species anymore. When I speak like this, I speak of that stinking pen.
Well, he was pretty outspoken about that. And let me tell you this, that little clip I played is just the tip of the iceberg of what goes on behind the scenes. And when you have orders coming down from the hierarchy that they are to cover this stuff up, you can see that it's not just the actions of a few rogue priests. It is systemic. It is something that's being fostered by the hierarchy of this church. Now, we've done shows about remember Cardinal Spellman? He was one of the most powerful men in America, the Cardinal of New York. We've had police investigators on saying how children used to be led into his offices and into his residence, and they had beyond a reasonable doubt information that he was a child abuser. But instead, the police officers were let go. There is a massive cover-up to protect this. And you see at the same time, this one priest who was sent away was given 15 years. So look at what they did to Tony Alamo, giving a minimum of 175 years for things that they never even proved sexual abuse. They had to use a sneaky lawyer trick called the Mann Act to even have a chance to get him in. And after bribing and talking to these kids to testify, and there were only a handful of them over 40 years, you knew it was a setup. And they did it because he criticized the Vatican in the right way. He said you can't just read 90% of the Bible. You can't just talk about 90% of the truth when you talk about your government. when you talk about your media. And for that, the Catholic Church is now, and the Vatican through the Jesuit order, is silencing people like this. They're silencing journalists who want to tell you about the drug deal, like they killed Gary Webb from the San Jose Mercury newspaper in California, who got down deep to what was happening in Nicaragua, talking about that same cartel we're talking about, as we talked in the first half hour. They're silencing journalists who want to get to the questions that I ask on this show. They use opposed opposition media on the internet to do that. And then they have all these other perpetrators working to harass people who are trying to get to the truth. That's their plan. And the unsuspecting millions and millions of Americans aren't getting the truth. And until they do, nothing will ever change. Now, that video I played yesterday, and go to my show yesterday, you're going to see a lot of people talking against, and, for example, Hitler was praising the Jesuit order and saying that he had formed his Nazi party based on the principles of that. Then you get many others that criticized the Jesuits. Now, don't forget, they will also put people in the mainstream media, especially the internet media, who criticize them but actually work with them. It's up to you to figure that out. Not up to me. I'm just here giving you information. And thank God we can still do it, even if it is limited at this point. But I think more people are catching on. Over the last 10 years that I've been trumpeting this message, so many more people are catching on, and it's great. I just wish that the mainstream of America would now figure out a way to get these questions into the public eye so that we could see a change. Until that happens, let me tell you something. It's all a big stage show they're putting on for you, and we happen to be a part of it. Yep, we play a huge part in their big, huge fictional play they're playing. We are basically the extras. Without us, this whole play wouldn't even be put on. But the problem is, most of us fall prey to it and believe them, carrying out their orders. And that's the problem. So listen, come back to my show tomorrow. I'll be back on Wednesday on the Investigative Journal. Please go to some of my old shows regarding the Alamo Ministry, other things, to really get to the bottom of why we don't have freedom of speech and religion in this country. And it goes deeper than just one left group talking against one right group and not allowing them to have a presidential debate or a speech. Okay, we'll be back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.